Thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Kristen St. I'm head of Stanford Libraries Conservation Services, and I'm also joined by Athanasios Velios, lecturer in documentation at the University of the Arts London. Later on in our breakout sessions, we will be joined by Stephen Stead. He could not be here at the very beginning of the workshop today. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And can everyone see my slides there? Yes, great. Okay. So we're really happy to be here for this workshop today. When we were pulling together our grant application for our second phase of our project, we planned to hold an in-person modeling workshop at the Library of Congress in fall 2020. And for obvious pandemic reasons, that did not happen. So we have been transferring this into online workshops instead. We had a January workshop and we noticed several people responded with interest from the Library of Congress. So we thought we would just pull everyone together and do an LC specific one this month. So we're really happy that you could join us today. I am going to begin by going over what we're doing for today's workshop and discussing our schedule. So I'm going to begin by discussing our consortium and our work so far and a pilot modeling conservation data that Library of Congress participated in. I'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to hand over to Athanasios, who will give an introduction to linked data and talk about how we're approaching it for conservation documentation. He's going to spend a lot of time discussing the CIDOC-CRM, which is the ontology we use to model documentation and conservation information. Then we're going to give you a short break, and when we come back, we'll move into breakout rooms where you'll get to participate in some hands-on modeling. We're dividing up into 2 groups, with Athanasios working with the conservators and Steve Stead working with staffers from the research and testing division. We have documentation from each area that you can focus on. So we'll do this in 2 parts, with a breakout session 1 focusing on modeling and how modeling works. And then that will be followed up by a shorter session where we talk about signposting or levels. And then we'll come back at the very end for a brief wrap-up session. So over the past 2 years, the Linked Conservation Data Consortium has brought together conservators, conservation scientists, and experts in the realm of linked data to explore how to make data from conservation documentation more accessible, distributed, and visible through the use of specific standards, technologies, and protocols. Some of our partners throughout this process are listed on this next slide. The Library of Congress has been part of this project since we began. Our work has been funded for the past 2 years through the UK-US collaborative grants in digital scholarship for cultural institutions from the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Council. And the projects we outlined for those grants have really driven our activities so far. These include organizing webinars and in-person workshops back when we did those, now online workshops, producing reports based on our research, working with our professional organizations on policy development, and as I just mentioned, undertaking a pilot to test out the feasibility and utility of modeling conservation records. So here we go. Linked data is a big field, and we have focused on 3 particular areas within it: modeling, terminology, and dissemination. In today's workshop, you'll see what we mean by modeling, or the organization of data by identifying relationships between information. Using the CIDOC-CRM ontology, developed by the International Committee for Documentation within the International Council of Museums, or ICOM. In workshops like this one, we have introduced conservators to the ontology, and we have worked with conservators to identify where the CIDOC-CRM could be adapted to better reflect our data. Members of our consortium participate in the special interest group of the CIDOC-CRM to advocate for those interests. In our terminology work, we investigate how to represent the way we use words in our documentation for use in linked data. Because linked data is by definition presenting information in a machine-readable way, much of the way we use terms in conservation is challenging. For example, we use the same words for different things. Grain direction means one thing to an objects conservator working with wood, to a book conservator working with paper. Or on the other hand, we use different words for the same issue or same concept. So an example of that could be something like blotter versus blotting paper in a treatment report. Both are fine and acceptable choices, but they are different and they would read different to a machine. Our work has included how to best align terminology, as well as mapping relationships between terms. Our field is not particularly rich in vocabulary sources that are ready to use in linked data, although there are some, including the Getty AAT, that are very fine. We need to do more and more comprehensively reflect and define more that are comprehensively reflective of our work. In the area of dissemination, along with reports and updates, our most recent work has been focused on data policy. We have worked with 3 major professional organizations in the UK and the US, IIC, ICON, and AIC, to develop a draft data policy, offering, among other things, guidance in sharing, privacy, and attribution of all types of data generated, not limited to linked data. We presented this at IIC Edinburgh last November, and we encourage you all to review the draft policy primer and template on our website. It's now under consideration and review by all 3 organizations' boards. So I'd like now to talk just briefly about the pilot that we did. When we began planning for our second phase grant proposal to the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Council, we had a lot of work we wanted to continue from phase 1. We wanted to work more on developing terminology, more modeling resources, and we were also interested in educational outreach and policy. But it also seemed necessary to try things out, to see if what we had been developing resources for would actually work. Could we take real conservation treatment reports from different institutions and model them? Could we ask research questions across the data sets and get back meaningful answers? So we approached 3 institutions who had been active in our consortium and also included my own. So you can see them on the screen. We worked with the Bodleian Library, the National Archives UK, the Library of Congress, and Stanford. All agreed to participate and contribute records. We decided among ourselves to pick one of the most common treatments that book conservators do, board reattachments. Since it would be easy to find treatment reports for that, it's one of the most common things. Yeah, we mainly did it because we thought it would be easy to find treatment reports to model. Another appealing aspect of looking at board reattachment was the range of treatment options possible. Over the past 20 to 30 years, new techniques have been developed to reattach boards, so we thought it was likely we'd have a range of techniques to represent. So each participant agreed to provide 30 to 50 records from over 40 to 50 years of conservation documentation, depending on how long their labs had been in existence. And in addition to this, with the help of Athanasios, we developed the following research questions so we could kind of see how we wanted to work with the data. You'll note from the questions we were interested in the history of board reattachment, what materials were being used, what associated conditions might also be present for books related to board reattachment. So once we had our research questions and we knew what we were going to do, participating labs identified and gathered reports and records for the pilot. Participating institutions prepared terminology spreadsheets so that each term had a unique identifier, and many had agreed on a concept definition or scope note from a terminology source available as linked open data. And some of you in this workshop may have participated in this work, and thank you for that. Then for some institutions, we had to prepare the reports to be structured data. We had to do that for my institution at Stanford. We didn't have to do that for LC because of work you all had already been doing on your documentation. And then we modeled the data. So Alberto Campagnolo was a postdoc fellow who worked on our project with us. He did a lot of the modeling of data for LC, Bodleian, and the National Archives UK. And then Ryan Liu from Stanford did modeling for Stanford's records. They have presented more information on this. And if you're interested, we have on our website a webinar where they each talk about how they modeled this data. So you can read that. We're also hoping they'll be submitting a paper for publication on how they did this work. Once the modeling was complete, the records were uploaded to Research Space. Research Space is a project from the British Museum And it's a site that can be used for the analysis and visualization of data. And this is just one screen image of an entire website that contains different ways of looking at our records. Athanasios spent a lot of time in working on this, and it's pretty interesting what we were able to come up with. So I'm going to stop my screen share there. And I would just like to say, before handing over to Athanasios, that linked open data as a means to share and enable discovery of information has been developed over many years. And adopting this for conservation documentation is a newer endeavor. There have been many challenges, and there is still much to work out. While some of what we present to you today is well established, such as the CIDOC-CRM ontology, how we apply it to conservation is a work in progress. Today, this workshop is not a course in how to use pivot tables in Excel or other off-the-shelf technology products or solutions. So we are relying on your engagement and creativity and analytical skills as you participate, and also your keen consideration and understanding of your documentation. So it's really a participatory workshop today. And with that, I will mute myself and hand over to Athanasios.
That's great. So this is one of my favorite slides. I mean, a lot of the preparation, sort of the ancient history of linked conservation data, the project, also relates to a survey that Ligatus, the research center that I work for, and the University of the Arts did many years ago in the monastery of St. Catherine's in Sinai. And I've got another nice photograph here with, you know, rather young faces now appearing. But the project was led by Professor Nicholas Pickwood, of course, and it was the time when I was introduced in the idea of documentation for books and the kind of detail that Nicholas was hoping to record the books in Sinai. And many of the questions that we're trying to address today with the Linked Conservation Data Project was already, you know, were already present during this this survey, and I'm sure in many other parts of the world as well, in other projects. But I like beginning this presentation with these slides, because then I pose the question, well, why did we want to go to Sinai to look at books when the British Library has got lots of them? Yeah, and the point is, of course, that we went to Sinai because the collection there maintains many original or very early bindings. So if somebody wants to study bookbinding history, one goes to where the data is, where the observations can be made. So we had the form, the survey form, and maybe you have already seen this, but it has sort of lots of fields that we were asked to fill in the monastery. We started off with a paper form, then we switched to a digital sort of XML form. But the point I'm trying to make is that we went through all this process because in humanities research and conservation research, the larger the sample we have, the more observations we can make, the better conclusions we can produce about our field. And the kind of research questions that we're asking are, of course, like the ones that Kristen mentioned for our pilot, but also, you know, more generally in conservation around technology of objects, or the evaluation of environmental management and the management of the environment, identifying various trends in conservation work. Do we work faster now than we used to work, or do we do you know, different work now than we used to, and many other relevant questions. So the idea is that in order to answer all these questions, which are useful for our profession, we need to have observations from many different places. And we can only do that when we're able to produce data that can be integrated. So it can be queried jointly with data from other places. Yeah. So the Library of Congress dataset will give a very Library of Congress-based view of the world. What will happen if we join that with other places? And that was very much the core of the pilot, and it's the core idea behind linked data. So it's data integration, bringing data together. That's all we're talking about. And there are lots of ways of doing that. I'm going to show you now why doing it through an ontology, as Kristen mentioned, is a good idea. So we have like I said, the form in Sinai, and it's got lots of fields in it. Like every other institution, every other project doing survey work, you have some sort of form where you record information. So each of these fields has a meaning. I'm bringing here a very basic example from different libraries. So say we have these 6 libraries wanting to integrate their data. Yeah, a basic example is the catalog number, or the manuscript number, or the shelf mark, or the call number. So how do we make sure that this code that we're using to identify the book matches with everything else in other databases? So we have 6 libraries, 6 databases here, and the same kind of information appears in different fields, yeah, different places. So one, you would say, okay, I'm gonna take, so I work for the Bodleian, so I'm gonna say, I'm gonna take my cat number, from my database, match it to COT from the BNF, bring the COT results back and present them together, and do the same with every other database. And this works, that's fine. But if, of course, everybody wants to do the same, you end up having a lot of connections to manage. And if one of these connections breaks because, I don't know, because the British Library decided to change the way that things are done, then all of these links are broken. And to fix them will require a lot of work. So it works if you do it one-to-one matching, but it is not scaling up very easily. Yeah? It's very difficult to scale up. So instead of doing this direct matching across the different databases, what we're suggesting through the ontology is to do just one match with an abstract entity. In this case, we have called it identifier. Yeah, or if you don't like the word identifier, we can call it E42. It doesn't matter what we call it, as long as we agree what the thing is. Yeah. So, and we can say that I've checked all these databases, and each one of them holds something that, you know, we understand as an identifier. So the Bodleian Library can connect to identifier, the BNF can connect, the British Library can connect, and now all of these things just connect with one abstract entity. If any of these local databases changes, the link breaks, but only one link breaks. The rest of the people can carry on searching each other's data through the abstract entity. So this scales up very quickly, very easily. And the other point is, of course, that I'm responsible for these links to the ontology and nobody else. So I don't need to worry anyone else if I decide to change my database. I can do it on my own. So the ontology basically provides these abstract entities that we can use to search each other's data after we have matched it. So the exercise we're doing today is to match our local data to an abstract entity, to abstract entities, to these global entities. So, you know, Wikipedia is our friend. What is an ontology? An ontology in computer science and information science, yeah? An ontology defines the types, properties, and interrelationships, the links of the entities that fundamentally exist in the domain of discourse. So it defines the kind of things that we're talking about in conservation, in book conservation, and how they are linked. This is the book. This is the actual book in Sinai. Yeah. So this is what exists in reality. A group of experts observes this reality, yeah, and produces some observations that can be recorded in a form or a database, and then we use that database to query it. Yeah, we query and we make conclusions about the reality. we're two steps away from reality, but our local expertise, yeah, we identify these abstract entities, we build our form. The form is exactly that, is the kind of entities that exist in our domain, in bookbinding history domain or book conservation domain. Now, we can do that for book conservation, but like Kristen said, we have this existing ontology, not only specific to book conservation, but more general ontology that has been produced by another group. And this is the special interest group that Kristen mentioned from the ICOM CDOC, yeah? And they have produced the CIDOC-CRM, which is the ontology. Now, again, this has a much wider scope. It has a global scope, not only book conservation. But if we want to integrate a variety of data from around cultural heritage, it is very helpful to have some global scope so that we can, bring together book conservation data with other data as well. So the ontology is providing us the entities that we're talking about in cultural heritage in general. And within that, book conservation and bookbinding history. So the CDOC-CRM does that. It provides abstract entities that we can map to our data. Now, it is a generic ontology, like I said, but we have got lots of the so-called extensions that make it a little bit more specific for specific domains. So we have an extension for the scientific observation model, CRM-Sci. That's very relevant to conservation. And we have other things here. I'm not going to refer to them now, but it's worth having a look at some point when you have time. Okay, so we have the CIDOC-CRM that we need to map our data to. How do we map our data? So choosing classes and properties. So the CIDOC-CRM is basically this hierarchical structure over here. And it is very small. I don't know how clear you can see this, but it starts over here with something called the CRM entity. So anything, anything in the CRM universe, and then it specializes it to different categories and more different categories. And all of these things are things that we use in our discourse, including conservation. So the first big break at this hierarchy over here is between the so-called Perdurants, so the processes, events, things that happen over time, things that I can only capture if I use a video camera, something that I can capture time, an event, and the endurance, things that remain fairly stable over their lifetime. And in conservation, we know that nothing remains stable, but stable enough so that it doesn't require a new identity. It doesn't become something else. We are still talking about the same thing. And these are called endurance. These are typical things that I can capture as a still. I don't need time to come into play to understand these things. Now, within that group of things, I have physical things. So things that have substance in 3 dimensions in the world that I understand. And I have the conceptual things that do not have substance. I cannot hold a poem. I cannot hold an image. I can hold a photograph that has an image depicted on it, but the image itself is a thing in my brain. It doesn't exist in physical space. I can't hold a name. So the difference between physical things and things in my head, that's very important. Then within the physical things, I have further distinction. So I have the objects, so things that have complete 3-dimensional boundaries, exist as solid things, or not necessarily, primarily solid things, but with three-dimensional boundaries completely defined, or things that require to exist on other things. So the difference between an object and a feature. So the button is an object, but the buttonhole is a feature. Yeah, the buttonhole can only exist if there is fabric around it, if there is, a jacket or a shirt. So we're starting now to becoming a little bit more specific in our distinctions. Okay, so now I will have an experiment, and I will bring up my participants list here. Okay, and I will ask questions. Do you have your participant lists open as well? The questions you can answer with a yes or a no. Okay, so I will ask a question, and please say yes or no in the participants list. Now, the question is, what is a book in the CIDOC-CRM universe? And I have two options here. I have that the book is a temporal entity or a persistent item. I will ask, is the book a temporal entity? Please vote yes or no. Only one vote. Can everybody vote? Yeah, please vote. Is the book a temporal entity, something that evolves, requires time? Is a book a similar thing to a football match? I only see 2 votes. I'm not going to carry on unless there are more votes, please. Okay. 4 votes. 4 negative votes. It is true. Okay, so if you clear your votes now, please, and then if you can vote, is a book a persistent item? So something that remains fairly stable over the period of its life. Okay, so the same people who voted no now vote yes. For the rest of the people, I'm not sure what's happening, but please stop me if none of this makes sense. It is important.
Athanasios, this is Shelley. I'm going to interrupt for a second and say for some people, it took me a minute to figure this out. If you go into your reactions button on the bottom, you can check yes or no, and then where you see your vote and everyone else's is if you pull up the participants list. It took me a second to figure that out, and maybe that will help people. So you vote from your reactions button, and then you can see your vote and others in the participants list. Okay. Sorry, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks,
no,
Shelley.
that's very helpful because on my Zoom client, I don't have a reaction button. So, okay, so I will press on. There are plenty more questions. So we are relatively confident with 4 positive votes that the book is a persistent item. So then the next question is, if it's a persistent item, is it an actor, E39 actor, or is it an E70 thing? An actor is an entity that has the capacity to make conscious decisions, yeah, and take responsibility of things. Whereas, who thinks that, sorry, if you think that the book is an actor, please vote yes. No. Okay, people are voting no. Indeed, the book is not an actor, yeah? But if you think that the book is a thing, please vote yes now. Okay, so it is a thing. And I get a few more votes. Yeah, please let me know if you're not able to vote. The next question then, it's a thing, yeah? So the next question is a book a legal object or is it a man-made thing? Now, if you think that the book is a legal object, please vote yes.
What do you mean by a legal object?
And that is the right question. So the legal object is something that somebody has legal rights over. So somebody can own it or rent it or buy it. So do we think that the book is a legal object? Yes. People mostly voting yes. Okay, if you clear your votes, and then who thinks that the book is a man-made thing, something produced by a human?
Can they be both?
And this is again the correct question. And indeed, that's the whole point. Yeah, they can be both. They can be both a legal object and a man-made thing. Now, we are conservators, we're not lawyers, so we couldn't care less about the legalities around the book. We only care about the physicality of the book. So in this case, I'm making a decision. I'm saying the book may be a legal object, but I don't care. Yeah, what I care is about the book being a man-made thing. So I'm choosing that. Another question here: is the book a physical thing, or is it a conceptual object, a thing that lives in my head? I mean, let's not continue voting. It is quite clear that it is not something that exists in my head. It is something with physical substance. Then the next step is to check whether the book is a physical object, a physical feature, or a physical man-made thing, as opposed to the man-made thing. Any ideas about this one? Who thinks that the book is a physical feature, a thing that exists within another thing? D. Emery, there's a vote on, but is it a legacy vote? No. Okay. So we don't think it's a physical feature. Who thinks it's a physical object? Yeah. Okay, that's true. And of course, some people will also say, well, it is a physical man-made thing. Now, when we get to this point, just using the labels to understand what the CRM means by these things isn't reliable. Yeah. So we need to look at the description of these entities, these classes. Now, I know it's a physical man-made thing, and I know it's an E22 man-made object, but let's check it. Yeah. So this is how you can clear your votes now. I don't think I'll have many questions other than that. So this is now the definition of the man-made object, which is this class comprises physical objects purposely created by human activity. Yeah, not a rock that has fallen down the mountain, something that a person made. No assumptions are made as to the extent of modification required to justify an object as man-made. Yeah, so it doesn't matter if I do a lot of work or little work, it's still man-made. Yeah. Okay, so now this confirms my understanding of the book. Yeah, so the book is a man-made object. So I hope this sort of gives you an idea of the kind of process the newcomers need to go through to understand how to do their mapping to the CRM. Defining the classes, yeah, first to understand what we have, what class it belongs to in the CRM. Now, the next point, of course, is this idea of relationships. And on the St. Catherine's form, we have this this page 7 where we deal with spine and spine linings and end bands. Yeah, and we have the box in here, which has got a heading, and the heading is lining. It doesn't say spine lining, but because this box is inside the big box that says spine, I understand that I'm talking about the spine lining as opposed to a board lining or another lining. Yeah. So in a way, just by looking at this form, I know that the lining is part of the spine. Now you got to imagine that the computer doesn't have that context. If we want to describe what the spine lining is, we need to make explicit statement that the lining is part of the spine. So my form has got this relationship by geometry. The geometry of the form implies that relationship, but I need to make it explicit for the computer. So I'm saying that the line is part of the spine. And the same applies here. Yeah, so I have animal as a type of adhesive within the spine. So I know that I'm talking about the adhesive that is used in the spine, yeah, and that the spine adhesive has a specific type. That type is animal. And I can do the same for the end band down here, yeah. So I've got Greek, the word Greek inside the end band. So I know that refers to technique. All this context exists in my head because I've seen these forms in the past, but the computer doesn't have it yet. So we need to make it explicit that the Greek is a technique for the end band. And it goes on, yeah, the material of the secondary thread and so on. So the CIDOC-CRM provides these kind of relationships. Only it formalizes a bit so that everyone knows what I'm talking about. So instead of part of, we use P46 forms part of, okay. And instead of has type, it says P2 has type and so on. Just formalizations, but it's exactly the same thing. So all these properties as well, I need to explicitly declare when I'm doing my mapping. Now, the CIDOC-CRM provides the kind of properties that each class can take. So the man-made object doesn't have any properties, but the physical man-made thing, which is a parent, yeah, of man-made object. So all man-made objects are physical man-made things, but I have other things that are physical man-made things and not objects. Like what? Well, like features, yeah? So the physical man-made thing is a parent class for man-made object, and it has these two properties. So it can depict or show visual item, yeah? It can like a photograph can show an image. Okay, and then if I move, so these two can be inherited by the man-made object. Now the physical thing has a few more, and there are a couple of interesting ones here. So the condition, yeah, that a physical thing can have a condition or consist of a material. These are particularly relevant to conservation, and so on. And again, all these properties are inherited, yeah, because it's the parent class that has them. And it goes on, yeah, the legal object provides a couple of more, and then the, we go all the way to the top to the CRM entity that provides these top properties over there. And you will notice that it starts with P1 is identified by, so we can give things names, and we can give things types. Yeah, so everything in the CRM can have a name, an identifier, and everything can have a type. So I have lots of properties then to use when I'm doing my mapping. Now, an important thing to know about the CIDOC-CRM is that it's based on the principle of events. Yeah, so the idea of the event, the activities and events, things that happen, and things that happen have participants. They happen at a specific place at a specific time, and we have objects that are created, damaged, modified, and so on during these activities. Now, this is quite important because, in many cases, we, we refer to the date of the book. But the book, of course, doesn't have a date. The book isn't an event, yeah? The production of the book has a date. The printing of a book has a date. The book binding might have a different date. Then the conservation event on a book has a date. So to associate dates with things doesn't really make sense. And in our documentation, we have the context, but we don't explicitly declare it. So this is something to worry to be aware of. And like I said, we have these two classes, type and appellation, the name, yeah, which apply to everything. So anything can have a type, and it turns out that in humanities, cultural heritage, and in conservation as well, much of the things we do is to assign types to things, classify things, put them in groups. It helps with our understanding. And also it can have a name, yeah? So the thing is different to the name of the thing, yeah? But it applies to almost everything. So this is the process that we're going to go on in the rest of the workshop today. But I want to show a couple of examples. The first example has been provided by a colleague of mine called Christian Baz. And Christian, until recently, was in the National Museum in Wales. I'm based in Cardiff, so I went down the road and I spoke to him, and he provided this data set. So the National Museum has got a book collection, but also is a sort of museum that has everything from natural history to fine art to book collection and so on. So he gave me this data set about mineral specimens, and this is the kind of stuff that we have. Yeah, so it's a spreadsheet, and he's put his records in there. This is what he uses. So if we were to map this to the CIDOC-CRM, it would look a bit like this. So each line of the spreadsheet is a separate object, a separate mineral sample specimen, yeah? So each one of them is an E22 man-made object. Each line in the spreadsheet is a man-made object. Now, the question is, of course, natural history specimens are not man-made. Well, somebody would say they are because, they didn't exist in a museum. Somebody went to a cave, broke it off, took it with them, and that event was enough to make it man-made. Okay, we can talk about that later. But the point is that each line in that spreadsheet is a separate man-made object. Yeah, it's the item that has an identifier, blah, blah, blah. And now this is connected to the first cell of that row, which is the identifier. Christian calls that the accession number. And the identifier in this case is 90.246. Okay, then the next column is a type of the specimen. So I have this property that I remember I mentioned, P2 has type, that connects any physical thing, anything in fact, with a type. And in this case, the type is pyrite, yeah, with galena, okay, if we have this specific category in our database. Then the next one is the chemical type. So this is a sulfide. Again, the same property, P2 has type. So I'm connecting the category of sulfide with that specimen, so I can group things quickly. And then I have a whole row of cells over here with condition, the kind of damage that these samples have. So the CRM provides a property P44 has condition, and that is E3 condition state, which is over here. This is, so you see how the two-dimensional table becomes this series of networks, yeah? So we have 1, 2, the property 3, and then 1, 2, 3. All the things are connected. Two entities are connected with a property. Two classes are connected with a property, and this pattern, appears everywhere. And it's so simple. We can encode everything we want based on that pattern. Christian also has some measurements from the environment of the store that these samples are kept, and I can model that as well. So each line of my spreadsheet is a measurement event. Yeah, it's an activity that we have registered, and this measurement event measures the air, the amount of fluid in the storeroom. Again, we can argue about what exactly the classes mean, yeah, but just follow the broad idea at the moment. So it measures this air in the room, and it observes a dimension, and that dimension has a type, so the temperature, and then it has a unit, which is Celsius degrees, and then it's got a value, yeah, 26.1. So you will see how over here I have 1, 2, and 3, 4 maybe extra balloons that I need to describe all this. So the spreadsheets, because the context is in our head, lacks the detail that we need to express the data in full. So we have to create that extra detail. Yeah, we have to build the fact that each line is a measurement, and also say that each cell is a dimension, and then split out the dimension into its components. So that is very much the process. And then I can bring these two things together. So you will notice that most properties start with a P. This property starts with an O because it comes from an extension of the CIDOC-CRM, yeah, the CRM PSI that I mentioned earlier. Don't worry about these codes that are being used. You know, I don't remember them. Very few people remember exactly the codes, but we have tables that we can look them up at the workshop later. Okay, so then we have, so then by connecting these two data sets, I can start answering the kind of questions that I was saying in the beginning, yeah? Correlate the damage of things with the environmental parameters. Okay, now I have a deck of slides following up, which is about the specifics of linked data. I'm not going to show this here now. I've got them in case people have questions, because we're not really dealing with the implementation aspects of linked data today. We're only dealing with modeling. So I'm going to skip those and show you another example from the pilot. Now, if I'm clever enough, I might be able to skip without showing a blank screen here. So I will go to section 4. Yep, here we are. So to show the example. And guess what? I have got an example from the Library of Congress. Because like Kristen said, this is very much the kind of work that Alberto and Ryan did for the project. So we already have this data, and this is the data that one of the teams later is going to use. But basically what happened was that we received, or Alberto rather, received a spreadsheet from the Library of Congress with certain types of information. And we had an open line with Shelley and Elmer, asking them what each thing means, each column means, and so on. But what Alberto did then, he took that spreadsheet and passed it through something called XSLT. Now, this XSLT is a language that allows us to transform records basically from one format to something we call XML. Don't worry too much about the details here. I admire people who are able to work with XSLT. It takes a very specific type of brain to be able to do it. And Alberto is clearly wired this way. I'm using very different tools to do that. So there isn't just a single tool to do the transformation. Yeah, whatever people feel comfortable with. So Alberto took the spreadsheet, passed it through his XSLT scripts, and then produced this RDF XML here. And RDF is very much the technology we're talking about when we refer to linked data. Yeah, so it's just a format, it's an encoding, it's a way of expressing data in triples. Yeah, remember the balloons I showed earlier. You have the one class, you have another class, and the connection between them. Yeah, the property. So RDF is designed to express data in that format. So he produced these RDF XML files, and it is very difficult to understand what has happened here because, you know, again, this is designed to be read by a machine, yeah, not so much by a human. So we have a little tool, and those of you who are interested later on, you can look it up. It's a little script that I put together called CRMVIS that takes this RDF XML RDF and turns it into a nice drawing like this one, which looks a little bit like the balloons that I showed you earlier. And over here, you have certain things. So you have blue things are events, yeah, things that happened over time. Brown things are physical things, yeah, like the books or components of the books. The orange things are types, categories. Yeah, the yellow things are conceptual things that we have in our head, and so on. So you can build a sort of, you know, an understanding of what's happening in here. Now I'm going to switch to an application that will allow me to zoom in to this thing more easily. So I hope that if I zoom in here, you will be able to read this. Yeah. So we have the book, so this is the physical item. Yeah. So it's a man-made object, and it tells me here it's E22 man-made object, given the CRM specification. And then we have all these things coming out of it. Is composed of, is composed of, is composed of. This is the property that connects a thing with its component parts. So the book is composed of a right board and a left board, yeah? And it's composed of, oh, this is far away. Do I have another? Composed of, oh, left board, I said that. Right, so we don't have anything else here. So if I follow this long line is the cover, yeah? Okay, very relevant. Of course, we're not talking about board reattachment to refer to these three things. And then each one of these things is connected to, right, so a modification event, something happened to the book, yeah, conservation happened to it, so the board was modified. Originally, it was detached and it was broken, so these are the condition state, the condition of the book, and it has a type. If I want to categorize all the components of things that I have in my database, I can draw out all the boards if I categorize them as boards, yeah? And so on. So you get the idea. So we create these maps, basically, that allows us to connect through different entities using all these properties. And if everyone uses the CRM to do that thing, we can bring all of these maps together and they will just work with each other. And this is exactly what we've done with the pilot. So my next slide is showing one of the Library of Congress books on the finished linked data pilot. So we can show pictures as well, but also over here, you will see the kind of relationships that I was showing you in the map earlier. So is composed of, so I've got a page of the book, and that book is composed of a cover, the book block, left board, right board, and so on. And then I can click on each one of these things and move on. Yeah, I've got a few more slides here just to show you. So we have the event of modification that used a general technique. Again, this thing comes from the CIDOC-CRM, and the technique was flattening. Yeah, and this is about the condition of a board which is detached and broken. And the last one is again the conservation work. Yeah, use the general technique that we know as hinging. So that's basically the overall path that that we're going to follow today with the different records that we've got, and the objectives of the workshop is for you to gain a bit of experience to understand how the mapping process works. And I hope I have made it clear why this is important. Yeah, if we map to the CIDOC-CRM, if all book conservation studios map their data to the CIDOC-CRM, then by using all these properties and classes, we will be able to share data so that I can query other people's data. So it's the point for today's exercise is to gain a little bit more experience on how to do this mapping, how to express data in the CIDOC, using the CIDOC-CRM, and identify the kind of records, the kind of data that we cannot express with the CIDOC-CRM because we want to improve it. Yeah. So if we identify this data, we contribute to the CIDOC-CRM and we make it better and to suit the conservation field.